it's over 7 years since the promulgation of the new constitution on August 27, 2010. The new dispensation that gave hope to the nation. It was a milestone that Kenya achieved after decades under an old constitution that had lost touch with reality. But a recent trend where leaders who have pledged to protect and defend the same constitution are going against it day by day and day in, day out. The judiciary, a key pillar of the 2010 constitution, is no longer respected. Leaders suspending sections of the law at will without blinking. Which way is Kenya going? Welcome to the State of the Nation. And I'd like to introduce the guests that we have here this morning. And I'll start with the lady with Elsie Soina. And she's the Deputy Executive Director ICJ. Thank you for joining us this morning. We also have Harrison Kinyanjui, who's an advocate of the High Court. Good morning, and thank you for joining us. Good morning. Last but not least, we have Dr. Jack Muimali, who is a Dean School of Law in JKUAT. Thank you for joining us this morning. Thank you. And, well, during the promulgation of the Constitution 2010, we have seen changes, and would like to start, first of all, during the promulgation of the 2010, the former President Mwai Kibaki and former Prime Minister Raila Odinga swore to always obey and defend the Constitution. Let's start off, first of all, with the journey that we as a country have embarked on to where we are today, to what we now term as the Constitution 2010. And it started off, if we can just take a look at where we have come from, with several milestones. And the establishment of a unicameral legislature by abolishing the Senate and merging the two houses. This is provided for by the president that can be elected through a general election as opposed to election by the National Assembly. And this was done a while ago. The Constitution of Kenya Amendment Act in 1982 introduced Section 2A to the Constitution, which converted Kenya into a one-party state. All political power in Kenya was vested in a ruling party, and at that time it was KANU, and we all know the journey that Kenya has taken after that to try and get into the multi-party state. And the Constitution of Kenya also was amended by an Act 14 in 1986, which removed security of tenure of the offices of the Attorney General, Controller, and Auditor General, thus eroding the independence of the two offices. Remember, what we are looking at is the journey and the steps that the Constitution has taken through time to be where we are today. The Constitution of Kenya Amendment Act number 12 in 1991 repealed Section 2A of the Constitution, which converted Kenya to a one-party state in 1982. And in 2005, the Constitution put to a referendum was rejected. Now, disagreement over how much power should be vested in the president, with many believing that Kibaki was attempting to garner dictatorship powers. But in 2005, that was rejected. Now, we come to where we made a historic change in 2010, where the Constitution adopted in a referendum. And Chapter 1, all sovereign power belongs to the people of Kenya and shall be exercised only in accordance with this Constitution. So that's what we now refer to as the Constitution 2010, and that's what governs us now. But before I come to the panel and possibly find out and hear from them what the weight of the Constitution really ought to be in a country, during the promulgation of the 2010, the former President Mwai Kibaki and former Prime Minister Raila Odinga swore to always obey and defend the Constitution. As recent as the swearing in to his second term, President Uhuru Kenyatta also swore to defend the Constitution. Given the actions of the recent past from both the opposition and the government, are our leaders living up to that oath? And that's exactly where we'd like to start this conversation. But before coming here, let's start with some of those pledges and what our leaders have been saying.
I, Mwai Kibaki, do swear that I will truly and diligently serve the people and the Republic of Kenya.
I, Raila Amolo Odinga, do swear that I will always truly and diligently serve the people and the Republic of Kenya in the office of the Prime Minister of the Republic of Kenya.
I want to say that
you, the people of Kenya, have delivered this constitution. Your constitution has set us free. God bless you and God bless Kenya.
So help me God.
All right, so that's basically the swearing in and them pledging to defend the Constitution. And I'll start with you, Harrison Kinyanjui. Have our leaders stayed true to that oath?
Well, let me say my personal assessment is that largely yes. And to some extent, this was a new document. It presented challenges, has presented challenges, and continues to present challenges in terms of effective implementation. One of which is, what do Kenyans do with a bloated civil service? The Constitution demands, for instance, the establishment of these commissions that are so numerous, some of which replicate their own functions, some of which the functions we do not see in terms of effective implementation. The Kenya Human Rights and Gender Commission, we hardly see what they do, but the Constitution demands that they exist. So Kenyans are bearing the brunt of that particular provision of the Constitution. We have a women rep position. They roam around the country, with all due respect. I'm going to be vilified for saying that. But majority of them, there are some with tangible results, majority of them have nothing to show for their position. But yet, the Constitution demands that position. The Senate itself, it has a majority of people whose delivery is hardly discernible, but they are there. The Constitution demands they be paid. And then we have the judiciary. It now is an independent organ. It has continued to enlarge itself. Now we're hearing that every county has to have a high court. Very well. In the court system itself, we have specialized courts. For instance, the environmental and land court, you have to take your land case to that court. It's a specialized court, as though that particular judge has to have specialized knowledge, not informed by other judges. I mean, the Constitution, in other words, in a nutshell, came with this bloated expenditure that is demanded of the Kenyan people. Now, the government of the day is required to collect taxes. The question is, between 2009 and August 27th, 2010, did the Kenyan income in terms of taxes, increase doublefold? No, it was the same. However, in terms of implementation, it was required that we implement with that narrow tax base the constitutional provision. So the exchequer then becomes challenged, and then you have more money being expended, which is replicated in the county government. We hardly see delivery of service because payment of these services have to be effected. Now, these same people who swore to uphold this constitution were at the forefront when we say this constitution is going to be problematic along the way in terms of implementation. We have a problem. And they say, yes, we have a problem. There are a few clauses that are problematic. But once we can amend. Have they amended?
No.
They have not amended. Okay. Now, we have the net effect of the people who feel disenfranchised, cut off, cannot feel the effect of development, now clamoring to dismember that constitution. We, the forefront of those people being the secessionists.
All right. Elsie, your opening remarks on whether our leaders are being true to the Constitution, and there are those who've described the Constitution as being an ambitious one for the country. Your thoughts on that?
Thank you. I don't think that the leaders have actually honored the social contract that exists between those they govern and those that set up to agree and collectively say this is our social contract between those who lead us, and this is what we want to see. As a matter of fact, I see there's this disconnection between the value proposition that is provided in our Constitution. The rights-based approach is, you can see, a complete disconnect at the implementation and the implementation stage and the expectations. The Constitution is very clear. Leaders must respect, fulfill, and protect the Constitution.
Correct.
It is a rights-based Constitution. And in ICJ Kenya's position, and even in my personal position, we see that an assessment is that there has not been a a respect for this social contract between the governed and the governed.
And maybe as I come to Dr. Jack, just your thoughts on whether this is a deliberate mutilation of the Constitution. From what Harrison has mentioned, there are several things that possibly were foreseen that may be a challenge in the future. And of course, the narrative at that point was, we shall amend, we shall fix them as we go along, which has not happened. Do you think this is a deliberate, literally a mutilation, or are we finding ourselves in a bind that we possibly had not foreseen?
It is a two-edged sword. On one hand, it is a deliberate, because when you assess the institutions between the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary, you will see the judiciary is on its hand trying very hard and actually living up to its expectations of defending the rights of the people of Kenya. On the other hand, you see there's a disconnect between the question of separation of powers. There isn't a clear understanding between these three organs of the state as to the roles that are expected. So on one hand, yes, there is a sense in which there's a deliberate mutilation, and on one hand, there's an organ trying very hard to try to make sure that the separation of powers principle is actually balanced.
All right, Dr. Muimali, do you think we got the Constitution 2010 without going through some of the challenges clearly and defining what our challenges are going to be as a country?
The best way of looking at it is to look at history of constitution making in general. And you'll find that constitutions are generally made at testing times. Even in the case of Kenya, the constitution that we got was after quite a period where things were not going well. And therefore, the people had to reflect on it themselves and try and come up with a document that would suit their purposes. The Constitution of Kenya, yes, as you have pointed out, is quite ambitious, which is a good thing. And in fact, my position would be that the fact that it is not being obeyed is not necessarily by itself a bad thing. Because the constitutions, as they are made, they are supposed to be tested. They are supposed to be put into constant test and therefore get improved.
But so if we say it's not a bad thing per se, then where does that leave us in terms of, because the Constitution is meant to be the very foundation at which it governs all of us.
Yes. And you see, the best way it governs you is determined by the challenges that it faces and how those challenges are addressed. My point being, it is not that the government or the opposition side are on the right, but it gives us a constitutional moment to try and test the structures that exist and therefore determine whether changes are necessary at this point. Look at the American Constitution. The first document was simplistic. There are quite a number of challenges that emerged after that necessitated a number of amendments to what they are today. And they still continue to debate on these things. In fact, to me, it presents the judiciary with an opportunity to pronounce itself and to enforce the rule of law, not just in respect of the government, but even the opposition. So that I, a layman, if I'm subject to the law, I know without doubt that if it was applied to these people who are deemed to be untouchable, then I am bound to obey and respect that constitution.
All right, Harrison, what should then be the process? Do you first of all agree that possibly we need to have some amendments? And then what should be the process of amendment? Because at the end of the day, if we amend and obey or disobey at will, then really we're living in a jungle.
I think, excuse me, we got to a very dangerous point where neoliberals, especially from the US, hijacked the Kenyan social contract. They finance largely, with some European nations and donors, so-called, the insertion of clauses that are inimical, that are dangerous, that are completely injurious to the fabric and the existence of the Kenyan nation. And by that I mean, for instance, let's take this Miguna's case. You hear learned lawyers who ought to have taken a minute just read the chapter on citizenship. It runs from clause 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 of the Constitution. And if you read Article 13, sub-Article 1, it says, before the promulgation of this Constitution, if you had a citizenship, upon the passage of the Constitution, you retain the status you had. So Miguna was a Canadian citizen. Now, then he is supposed to regularize his dual citizenship.
And there's a process to do that.
There's a process.
A legal process
now,
to do that.
The Constitution also says that Parliament will enact a law that stipulates the rights and the duties of a citizen. And you hear people talking about a so-called privilege to a passport, as though this is a blanket thing that you have out of legal context. It is issued within the meaning of the Citizenship and Immigration Act. And you come to specific provisions of that act that tell you that a citizen who has that passport is obliged to comply with the duties of a citizen. Now, the moment you step outside of that and you claim you're a dual citizen,
that privilege is removed.
Oh, it is. And then you find, therefore, that people have expectations, given their neoliberal approach of so-called human rights. They have elevated this Constitution, deified it, to the point that they almost want to worship it. And they forget that law is made to facilitate existence. It is not the other way around.
All right, and I can see, Dr. Muimali, you want to come in, but I wanted to take a short break. Just hold that thought for a bit, because I also want us to explore the fact that, yes, you put it rightly, and when we listen to lawyers, and lawyers will start with an opening statement, the law is very clear. The more it becomes clear, the more it doesn't become clear by the sounds of it. But we'll come back and look at that. And, of course, some of the situations that we have found ourselves in as a country in regards to the Constitution. We take a short break. We'll be right back.